into trouble. So when God talks about us being sheep, it's not necessarily a compliment, because one of the things that we are pretty prideful about is we can take care of ourselves. How many of you, and since we've got the horns, this helps, how many of you are really confident that you can take care of yourself? And you have to be honest. See, we actually, if we were really truthful, most of us would be beeping our horns, because most of the time we do think we're more than capable of taking care of ourselves. It's only a churchy answer a lot of times that we give when we acknowledge that, no, not in reality. There's some big issues that we need God for. So, for example, Suzanne on Tuesday is a little concerned about her doctor's visit. And we've been praying because it's a hard issue. The doctor calls you up and say, hey, we found out something on your test. You need to see a specialist. We've got one booked for you on such and such a date. And first thing, it's whenever you hear words like heart issue, cancer, all those big things that you have no control over or very little control over, all of a sudden, guess what we're doing as human beings? We're on our knees and we're praying, aren't we? And that's because up until that time, we are pretty confident that we can handle ourselves. No different than a sheep wandering off and just saying, hey, that path looks pretty good. And then they find out the next thing they've done is they've gotten stuck in bramble bushes and they can't get out. So human beings get in that sort of situation, and the next thing we're doing is we're praying to God, hey, rescue me. But we didn't give him a lot of attention or allow him to do a lot of leading up until the time we get into trouble. So you see the beauty of illustrating us as sheep and Jesus as the shepherd. So here's Jesus, and he portrays himself not just as a shepherd, but as the good shepherd. And he portrays himself as protector, as savior, as caretaker, as the perfect leader. And by the way, we need to look no further. Now, I left out 2 verses. I told you we were going to read the first 20 verses, but notice I stopped at verse 18. So here's verse 19. At these words, the Jews were again divided. Many of them said, he is demon-possessed and raving mad. Why listen to him? Now, do we debate about leaders? Do we micromanage everything that they say? Micro-inspect everything that they say? Yes, we do. The Jews they were no different on this. They even went so far as to say, here's this person who has demonstrated the ability to teach God's word perfectly. The compliments that were given to him was that he taught with authority. He taught like no one ever. He had an understanding of the scriptures even from an early age. Every time he was questioned and tested, he came out with flying colors. And here he is, he's talking about being the good shepherd, and they're debating what he's talking about. Look at verse 21. I lied to you. We're actually going to do 21 verses. But others said, these are not the sayings of a man possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? So here's Jesus preaching this great sermon about not only who he is, but what he's going to do. Why is that a turning point? Why is that such a big deal? If we go back to Ezekiel chapter 34, we find out why. Remember, in the audience, not only did we have Jewish people who were just trying to figure out how to live, we also had Jewish leaders. And it was the Jewish leaders that took exception to what Jesus had to say. Why? Because they were pretty confident about their leadership abilities. One of the problems, though, is those Jewish leaders had not been doing a very good job in leading God's people the way God wanted them to do it. That's one of the reasons why Jesus and the Jewish leaders butted heads all the time. They just ran into problems with each other over and over and over and over again. And the issue was these leaders were constantly, forever, confronted by Jesus with their inadequacy as leaders. In one of those personal moments, remember Nicodemus comes to him at night, and he knows something's going on with Jesus. All the way back in John chapter 3, he comes to Jesus at night, and he's questioning Jesus. He knows there's something about Jesus, but there's such a political motivation behind those who were against Jesus that he, as a Pharisee, could not come to Jesus in the open. He had to come at night. And he comes and he questions Jesus. And remember Jesus' reply? He's talking about being born again. And he says to Nicodemus, "You mean you're a teacher of Israel and you don't know these things?" So that was all the Pharisees. That was all the Sadducees. It was all the priests. It was all the Levites. By and large, they had been failing the nation not just for a few years, not just for 100 years, not just for the 400 years between the Old Testament and the New Testament. They had actually been failing for millennia. Go all the way back to Ezekiel chapter 34, and we find these words. God is giving a prophecy through Ezekiel about the future. He's talking about Jesus coming, and this is what he has to say. Ezekiel chapter 34, starting at verse 10. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against the shepherds. I'm against the Levites. I'm against the priests. I'm against the teachers of Israel. So when he says I'm against the shepherds, he's talking about the under shepherds, the hired men that Jesus referred to in John chapter 10. I am against the shepherds and will hold them accountable for my flock. I will remove them from tending the flock so that the shepherds can no longer feed themselves. So apparently one of the things that had been going on with the shepherds, the leaders of the Jewish people, was they had been capitalizing upon their leadership to make themselves richer and fatter, and well, they were taking from the poor and making themselves rich. So God has a problem with that. So I have a problem. I will remove them from tending the flock so that the shepherds can no longer feed themselves. I will rescue my flock from their mouths, and it will no longer be food for them. That's why the Jewish leaders were so upset with what Jesus had to say. That's why the Jewish leaders were so upset with Jesus, period. That's why the Jewish leaders just could not stand Jesus, because he was stuck in their craw. Jesus was just constantly a thorn in their side, because at every turn they failed, as every human leader has a tendency to do. What God did with Jesus is he brought us a new leader. Even though we have earthly leaders, God brought us a new leader, and he reestablished himself through Jesus as leader of the people. That's what he's meant to be. Our problem, though, as human beings, as we are in this unique time, as we get ready to choose a new leader for our country, is many of us have a conflicted idea of how we should approach human leaders. We think our world makes or breaks on the back of human leaders, and I have to tell you, they will disappoint you. Some will succeed. There will be successes, but humanity, by its very nature, will fail. So as we choose this year, we choose based on our best confidence, with the realization that no matter who we choose, there is a very good likelihood that they will fail. We also want to be great stewards and we want to choose people who at the very, very best are going to uphold some of our values, some of our beliefs. But we also need to be prepared, since this is a democratic country, it's a republic, since we choose our leaders, and we're not the only ones involved in that choice, we have to be prepared for sometimes, like I told you at the beginning of this, I've been prepared every time that I vote for the lesser of evils. We may get somebody that we don't necessarily agree with. We may get somebody who's contrary to our worldview. We may get somebody who is, well, they just don't fit our mold. And we may get somebody who disappoints us greatly. We may even vote for somebody who disappoints us after we voted for them. That is the nature of human leaders. But a reminder is that we have a good shepherd who's always in control, no matter who we have sitting in the presidency or in the governor's office or in our county or in our city. No matter who we have there, Jesus is still king. He is still the master leader. He is still the good shepherd. And he's not going to stop even up until and continuing through the time he comes back to get us. But he has given us a responsibility when it comes to our human leaders. In addition to the vote and the realization that human leaders can and often do, and well, they constantly do fail, we do have a responsibility. God turned around how we think about leaders with Jesus, and forevermore, here's what we're supposed to do. This is what Paul writes in 1 Timothy chapter 2, starting at verse 1. I urge then, first of all, that requests, prayers, intercession, and thanksgiving be made for everyone, for kings and all those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. This is good and pleases God our Savior, who wants all men to be saved and to come to a knowledge of the truth. When I finally read that and understood it for what it meant years ago, my prayer life changed when it came to our national, county, city leaders. It doesn't matter who's in office, whether I like them or not. My responsibility as a Christian is to follow the Good Shepherd. He's my king. But it's also my responsibility that even though I might have someone I disagree with, I might have someone that I don't really like for what they do, I still have a responsibility as a Christian, a follower of the Good Shepherd, to pray for those in authority. So I know we're in frustrating times. We're locked up at home. I can't get a haircut, and I really need a haircut. And people are keeping me from getting a haircut, and I'm not happy. I still need to pray for my leaders, do I not? You can beep your horns, yeah. So as we face this election year, and it's a tough one, as we face what we're going through right now, your leaders need our prayers. Because our Good Shepherd sacrificed not only for you, he sacrificed for them. And if nothing else, we need to remember that they need, beyond what our political alliance is, they need Jesus more than they do anything else. And part of our prayers need to be that our leaders lead, but all that are around us, we need to give thanksgiving, and they need Jesus too. Let us not forget that. So, my communion cup spilled over in the wind. It's now time for communion. This whole thing is, I've got some. It's time for communion. Now, in our churches, if you're visiting with us today, in our churches, we have a tradition. We go after Acts chapter 20, verse 7. It says, at the first day of the week. And in Jewish times, the Sabbath was actually from sundown Friday until sundown Saturday. So we're in the first day of the week. It was a regular work day for them. But they had so followed the Good Shepherd, they had so transformed that these Jewish followers who had been worshiping on the Sabbath now switched their worship day to the first day of the week, Sunday, what we call Sunday. There was something else that they did, and because of Jesus, because of his teachings, particularly because of the covenant that he made with his church on the night he was betrayed, Jesus, well, he set up a ritual for us. It's something that's to be observed. He says that each time we gather, we're supposed to do this. And so in Acts chapter 20, verse 7, we find out that every first day of the week, the church gathered, and they called it breaking bread, which is communion. We call it commonly communion, or the Lord's Supper. And what it represents, as we take, and if you peel off the little plastic on top, you're going to find a little piece of bread up there. And that bread represents Jesus' body.